there's two ways to go about this. You can either innovate with the industry, or you can claim ignorance for a short time until code catches up. We want to be on the side of innovation. We want to be working with the very best products, putting out the very best product. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the NS Podcast. Last week I had talked about building tight on the podcast here, and building airtight homes, and had a ton of great comments on there. I wanted to address a couple things. Number one, one of you guys had commented saying that an ERV or an HRV does not have a filter, or what I was referring to is not a filter. It's the core. It's a heat exchange core that exchanges heat and moisture depending on the makeup, which determines whether or not it's an HRV, heat recovery ventilator, or an ERV, energy recovery ventilator. I wanted to correct that. These units typically do have a filter for the air coming in, but what I was referring to is this cube in the middle that exchanges. That is not considered a filter. I just want to address that. Had a lot of questions come up about my take on particular building practices, and one I wanted to dig into today is ICF, insulated concrete forms. I don't have any experience with ICF specifically, but a good friend of mine who's also a builder here in Massachusetts, Jay Burgess, he had built an ICF home, and I got to tour that home, I think when he was dried in at that point. It was really interesting, and there was a lot of things that once I saw it in place made me realize that, or I kind of uncovered things that I didn't think of at the time. But my take on it is, I think it is a really interesting way to build a home. The argument typically comes up about carbon and the carbon footprint that concrete has, and while I do think that is a real concern, and I have very little knowledge in the concrete world, but would love to have a conversation with someone that is more connected to it. But I hear and see and read things that they are looking to actively reduce the carbon footprint of concrete in different ways. I've heard of hempcrete. I've heard of lighter weight concrete where they're adding things in it where you're not using as much material. But ultimately, that's typically what I hear as the downside of ICF. Someone actually also commented that they have heard of termites infesting some of the foam. I don't personally recall ever hearing about that. But let's just talk about what ICF is for a second. Insulated concrete forms. So essentially what you have are two pieces of foam that are webbed together with plastic webbing, I guess you would call it, and they almost go together like Legos. They're very light and they clip together like Legos. Typically, you work with the ICF form manufacturer, and then you work with an installer. And the form manufacturer takes your blueprint of your house or your design of your house, and basically lays out what these blocks look like, and then they come on site. And like I said, they're like giant Legos, and they click together. Now, what that is it's a permanent. That foam is permanent. So you have insulation. The foam is the insulation. It's on the inside as well as the outside, but it also acts as your formwork for the concrete wall. But like a traditional concrete wall or foundation wall, you strip the forms and then you have the exposed concrete. This concrete never gets exposed. It's always wrapped in foam on both sides. So what that means is that if you are using it for a foundation wall, you would typically put some sort of protection board, drainage mat, prior to backfilling. That way, any water that makes its way up against the foundation has a path down to typically a perimeter drain. But you don't want to be backfilling against strictly to the foam, because you'll be damaging the foam, thus damaging the insulation value. Now, on the inside, it's the same thing. You have foam that's exposed, and say you're using this just for a basement, which would be the more typical approach using concrete walls for basements. You would have exposed foam throughout the entire basement. And if you're going to finish your basement, a lot of times what you have to do is you have to frame a wood wall and then add sheetrock and the finishes on top of that. With the ICF, this formwork, that plastic webbing I mentioned, also acts as a backer for screwing. So that plastic webbing is embedded into the foam panels, and you can actually screw drywall right to it. Now, this is something I didn't think of when I walked the project, is I realized that you don't have any stud cavities or cavities in general for plumbing and electrical and things like that. So when it comes to a project like this, let's go back to Jay's house. Jay actually used concrete all the way up to his roof line. So his house was a 2-story home. So he had 1 below grade and then 2 above grade. And then he framed the roof with traditional wood framing. But that meant his whole entire envelope was all concrete. And one of the things I really like is it forces you to think ahead. You're thinking about everything way before building, which is something I'm an advocate for. Windows, doors, all of that stuff has to be figured out and checked 2 times, 3 times. This is concrete. These are, 8, 10, 12, sometimes maybe even thicker concrete walls. And cutting in a window later, while it's not necessarily impossible, it's much more costly than taking the Sawzall out and cutting a new opening in the wood framing. So with that being said, it forces you to think ahead, and it's also going to force you to think ahead about your mechanicals. You don't have exterior cavities. A lot of times your mechanicals are in interior cavities anyway, so that works out. But let's think about electrical for a second. I remember being on site and seeing these channels in the foam running. They were about 1 inch wide, and I was like, what is that? And he said it was for his electrical. And they actually, I believe, Jay, you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys went back and spray foamed with a can of spray foam in those grooves. So once the wires were in the wall, you got your inch and a quarter embedment, so any potential screw going through that wall didn't hit them. But you guys filled that back in to maintain your R value. And I thought it was really cool. And they had modified, I'm not going to give it exactly, but they had modified a skill saw to basically cut a dado in the foam. And so it made it really quick work to kind of channel around the electrical and bring them to any of the exterior electrical boxes. Now, the one of the best parts about ICF is the massing of it, and the fact that it's solid concrete and it has tremendous mass. So with it's going to be really high in insulation R value. It's also continuous insulation. So what I mean by continuous insulation is similar to our Rhode Island passive home. We have a continuous 6-inch rock wool exterior insulation on that home, and I said that right. 6-inch continuous exterior. And what I mean by continuous is that there's no breaks. There's no thermal breaks. In a traditional home, if you're building a home, say with wood framing, you're going to have studs typically on 16 inches on center, and in between the studs, you're going to add batt insulation. So that's fine. Batt insulation in between the studs, and on the outside, you have plywood, and then you have your house wrap and your siding. But you have a thermal bridge where that stud is. So every 16 inches, you have a 2x6 stud that can that can transfer the cold air from the outside through the siding, the sheathing, into the stud, and then eventually get back to the home. Now, where we have continuous insulation on that, now the entire exterior of the home is wrapped in insulation, and there is no thermal bridging. That's the thing that's similar to ICF. ICF has this continuous foam exterior insulation. There is no thermal bridging. The only thermal bridging that you might experience is at the windows, and if you're using a high performance window, they typically have a thermal break built into the frame to help with that. Now, why is that important? Well, as we talk about tight homes, things like that, you want to prevent the dew point, or you want to prevent condensation from developing. And if you can think of, anytime, a car window, and the heat's, if the heat is blasting on the inside, and the outside is freezing cold, you can end up getting condensation on that window. It's similar when your R value is really low, or if you're not insulated well, or you're you're warming up a product that is seeing cold on the other side, you end up getting condensation, similar to a beer glass. Cold beer in a beer glass, and it's warm in the room, it's going to sweat. So the continuous insulation is just a really good detail. I'm trying not to get too technical with it. I'm trying to talk a little bit more about the benefits of these things, but also how it relates back to my thought on ICF. And, going back, I have not used ICFs. I have no personal experience with them, but walking Jay's house and understanding why he was so adamant on using it, I do understand the benefits. But for me, I would love to try it out. And like I said a couple minutes ago, a lot of times a lot of people will use it just for below grade. Like I said, they're light, almost Lego blocks. It makes forming relatively easy because it's, they're light, they stack together. But, to add advice to this, it is important to work with a certified installer because you can't just stack this stuff up and fill it with concrete. There is structural steel that goes into it, rebar. You have to support the foam while it's being the concrete is being placed, so the stuff doesn't tip over. And then furthermore, you can't just pour the entire house either at one time. You have to do it in lifts. But I think I should get Jay on the podcast, talk a little bit more directly with him. I think it would be a great topic that we can dig into. If you guys are interested in that, comment below. Let me know. Before I get into the next topic, this podcast is brought to you by Reno Run. If you guys are interested in getting free shipping, it's on me, podcast.renorun.com/NS. We've been using them here at NS Builders for months now. They're preventing my team from having to leave the job in the middle of the day, running to the hardware store or the lumber store to grab one quick thing to keep the job going. Instead, they are able to keep their butt planted on the job site, hop on the phone or the app or the website, order what they need, and it's there within 2 hours. So again, if you guys want free shipping on me, podcast.renorun.com/NS. Another question that came up on last week's video is why are we using CDX versus Huber's Zip product? And, was there a reason for it? There was a reason for it. And I want to start by saying I don't think Zip is a bad product. I frankly don't think there's a lot of really bad products out there. It really comes down to install. Just like anything, at the end of the day, if the install is done really well, then the building will perform very well. One of the things I learned in my passive house class is that people have achieved passive ratings with Tyvek if it's done correctly. And again, not saying that Tyvek is a bad product. It's simply a product that does what it's intended to do. Are there better products? Of course. There's always something better out there or different. And for us, we decided that we wanted to use a system, and we wanted to control what that system was by using a self-adhered WRB and weather-resistant barrier. And, while Zip has its all-in-one green sheathing and you can tape the joints, etc., we just felt as though we would feel more comfortable with building the home, building the envelope, and then wrapping the building monolithically with a WRB. Something that we explored as well that I think we'd love to try in the future is a spray applied product. So we're basically spraying a monolithic coat over the entire home. My research says it is more expensive, but I think in the right situation it would make sense. But here we've decided to work with the team over at Sega, and we're going to be using their product to wrap the home. And they have a slew of tapes that go along with that, as well as sealants. And Ken, if you guys don't follow him on Instagram, Tape Ninja Ken, he has been great to walk us through how these details work, and just the consideration for how we are going to achieve our air tightness, but also between, the tricky details from concrete to plywood sheathing, what that detail looks like underneath our door pans. What does that detail look like? How are we transitioning from our wall to our roof to have this continuous, sealed, wrapped house? I'm thinking of like gift wrapping, which is a great, it's probably a great skill to have in this part of the building because you are taking your time and you're wrapping the entire house. And what's interesting and what you'll see in future site visit episodes are some of the details that even myself have never really paid close attention to, and specifically on how these WRBs, these self-adhered products, detail in the corner, inside corners, outside corners. Something that came up on the job site is you're actually not supposed to bridge those corners with the same piece. You're supposed to bridge that with a tape product. So we'll stay tuned. You'll see that in a future site visit episode. We're going to walk through the details of that. But in short, it wasn't so much that we didn't want to use it because we didn't like it. It was just our approach and the way we wanted to build this home. We felt more comfortable being able to control that. And one of the things that I fear with products, and it's not always the case, but a lot of times I feel as though products are put in the market, and this is not a shot at Zip again. I like those guys over there. They've been a huge supporter of us. But one of the things I fear, and it's more related to, again, the install and our trade partners installing this stuff, is that when products are easier to install, I feel like sometimes they will be the attention to detail suffers, at least from my experience, where it's like, this product has made our job simpler, so we don't have to put as much time and effort to it. And that's absolutely false. And this goes with every product out there. And those that are listening, I think that it is important to really understand what I'm saying here, is that just because a product is made to make a job simpler does not mean it doesn't require as much attention to detail. And that, when you do think about the reasons as to why a product doesn't work, often can be, and you hear, trades talk about it all the time. It's like, yeah, the warranty means nothing because they're just going to come out and tell you did it wrong and not cover it. And it's like, no, that's a very real possibility. And the question is, did you spend the time in understanding the proper way to install it? Did you understand? Did you talk with the reps? And I think nowadays, 2022, that is even easier to do with the use of social media. All of the products that we're installing, we are talking with our reps to make sure that our process is correct. And yes, it is time consuming. I'm fortunate to have the team that wants to do the very best work, and they're spending the time reaching out and making sure that we're going about it the right way. I talked about this in 2 site visits ago, and I'll talk about it again. Our passive home down in Rhode Island, Rockwool, I had reached out, asked if we were able to stick the insulation onto the foundation, and I never communicated to what product we were sticking it into. But, the reality is, I'm not saying that they gave us approval to do it, but they said, yeah, there was a conversation that it sounded like it should work. Why can't we take a piece of insulation, stick it into, a product that is wet? And because we've done that with a fiberglass material. The fail for me was that I never communicated what product we were sticking it into, and I never reached out to, it was a Tremco GC250. I never reached out to Tremco and had that conversation. And this isn't on Rockwool. This was a casual question I had for one of their reps, asking if this could be set into a wet waterproofing. Made sense. Why not? But come to find out, when I talked to Tremco, they said it would have worked if you were using XYZ product, but you were using this product. And the technical reason for that is the way it cured. It cured through moisture, and it said right in the description that it needed to dry prior to being covered up. And this was a real concern that, here I am thinking that we might have to dig up the entire foundation, redo this. Like, did we compromise anything? And thankfully, being that Rockwool is permeable, and we kind of ran through how this was installed and when it was backfilled, and what we did as far as pull tests, and what the product looks like when we do pull a piece of insulation off. All said and done, was it installed incorrectly? Yes. Is it compromised? Very unlikely. And we collectively agreed that what we've installed works and we can move forward. But the big but, talk to both parties in the future. And that is, I want to wrap up saying like that is really important. It's very easy nowadays to, just kind of put your head down and get work done. But as products evolve, as homes get more complicated, as we build tighter homes, like all of these things matter even more. And frankly, I think I said this before, there's two ways to go about this. You can either innovate with the industry, or you can claim ignorance for a short time until code catches up and decides that, hey, listen, you're not building to code anymore. And being who we are and at what point in our career we're at, we want to be on the side of innovation. We want to be working with the very best products, putting out the very best product, and making sure that we're working with the reps and the technical people that can help us put together a great product. So hopefully that answered a couple of your questions. If you guys have more questions, drop them in the comments on YouTube. I'm always on there reading them. I do have a handful more, but I'll save those for a future episode. Appreciate you guys listening. As always, big thanks to Rent or Run for partnering on this podcast. We'll talk to you guys next week.